Cover me, Blade. Cover me, Blade. Cover me, Blade.
I used to think this game was sick, and I was so excited to get back to it. I was 8 years old, fresh out of watching Blade 2, and to me, this was exactly what a vampire game was supposed to look like. It was dark, violent, it was cool as hell. I remember Blade with a sword, guns, a leather coat, just destroying vampires, and that's what really stuck with me. So when I booted this up, ready to revisit it for this channel, I didn't make it 15 minutes in before I realized this is not what I remembered. Right away, you're hit with this forced trailer for X-Men Next Dimension, which you can't skip. Then you load into the actual game, and the big gimmick it throws at you is this 360-degree combat system that uses the right analog stick for attacks. Back then that was kind of futuristic, but now it's just clunky and it's awkward. It kind of feels like a half-finished idea from a tech demo. But this game was released in 2002 with the Blade 2 DVD, and critics tore it apart. Low 40s on Metacritic, sluggish controls, dumb AI, you name it. But there's still something interesting here, because under all the jank, you can see what they wanted it to be. It's just buried under deadlines, missing polish, and a combat system that never quite came together. So let's break it down. What did this game actually get right? What completely fell apart? And why do I still kinda respect the mess they were trying to build here? Back in 2002, I was 8 years old, and Blade was the absolute epitome of cool. The movie had just hit theaters, and I was obsessed with Wesley Snipes and his portrayal of the Daywalker. So when the Blade 2 game came out, I was all in and I rented it. I remember the excitement of booting it up on my PS2, ready to jump in and just destroy vampires. But fast forwarding to today, revisiting the game with my adult eyes, and it's a bit of a different story. One of the immediate things that I noticed was no Wesley Snipes. Instead, Blade is voiced by Tom Clark Hill. It's a subtle change, but it affects the overall authenticity and connection to the character that I had grown to admire. Then we have the combat system. The game introduced a 360-degree combat mechanic, where you use the right analog stick to direct attacks. And at the time, it felt innovative, but now it comes across as clunky and unresponsive. Critics at the time weren't kind either. Eurogamer described the combat as an awkward waltz of confusion, and GameSpy criticized the limited use of Blade's iconic sword. The game's reception reflects these issues. On Metacritic, the PlayStation 2 version holds a score of 49, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. The Xbox version fared slightly better, but still received mixed feedback. Reflecting on my experience as a kid, I'd probably given it like an 8 out of 10, fueled by the excitement and my obsession with Blade at the time. As an adult, understanding game mechanics and design better, it leans more towards a 4 out of 10. Playing through this, it was a nostalgic game, but it definitely doesn't hold up. Blade 2 was a third-person action beat-em-up that came out in 2002 for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. It was developed by Mucky Foot Productions and published by Activision. Originally, it was supposed to launch alongside the movie in March, but instead, it dropped in September, right when the Blade 2 DVD hit shelves. Instead of adapting the film, the game acts more like a follow-up. It's set about 6 months after the events of Blade 2, with Blade and Whistler teaming up again to stop vampires from creating a new strain of super vampires, even more powerful than the Reapers. The big selling point was its unique combat system. The developers pitched it as something brand new, 360-degree melee combat using the right analog stick. It was kind of ambitious, no doubt, but reviewers weren't impressed. Most found the controls frustrating, the gameplay repetitive, and overall, it just didn't land. The game got hit with mostly negative reviews and sold very poorly. Less than 500,000 units. It was meant to ride the hype of the film, but it never really found an audience. Except for 8-year-old me. So what the game really hangs everything on is the combat. Blade 2 was built around what they called a 360-degree combat system. You don't use face buttons to punch or kick. Instead, you flick the right analog stick in the direction you want Blade to attack. It sounds like a cool concept. The idea was that Blade could respond to enemies all around him in real time. But here's the catch. You have zero control over what kind of attack he actually throws. It's just directional. You might flick the stick and get a jab, or a roundhouse, or sometimes a weird sweep. It's random, and it never feels reliable. There's no precision to it, no depth. You can't chain attacks together into combos. But because the system is so inconsistent, you're mostly just hoping Blade picks the right move at the right time. There is a block button, and you can pull off finishing moves, like grabbing enemies and staking them, but they're context sensitive and kind of janky. They work half the time and look stiff as hell the other half. Combat's also tied to a rage meter that fills slowly as you fight. It's divided into 3 tiers: sword, shield, and strength. At level 1, Blade pulls out his sword for a limited time. Level 2 adds invincibility, and level 3, you get the sword, invincibility, and a strength boost. It's meant to feel like a power fantasy, but charging it is slow, and by the time you reach level 3, most of the fight's already over. It's pretty cool in concept, but like everything else in the system, it's too limited and clunky to really change the gameplay. You spend most of the game swinging slow, awkward punches, just waiting to finally feel like Blade again. You start with the mock pistol. It looks cool, sounds decent, but hits about as hard as a Nerf gun. You unlock more weapons as you go, a shotgun, a glaive, silver knuckles, even UV grenades. But none of them feel satisfying. There's no real impact, no proper aiming, and the animations are too slow for how fast the enemies close in. The game auto-locks for you, and it usually picks the wrong target. You'll try to shoot the guy attacking Grant, and instead aim at someone across the room, or just shoot Grant. There's also body armor, and serum for health regen. But it doesn't change how the game plays. You don't become more tactical, you just survive a bit longer. And to make it even worse, you have escort missions. There aren't many, but they hit hard, and not in a good way at all. Most of the time you're babysitting Dr. Grant, while also trying to deal with clunky combat and swarms of enemies. The AI on your escort target is barely functional. She'll stand in open combat zones or walk into danger while you're busy spinning in circles trying to hit something. And if she dies, that's it. You're booted back to the checkpoint, sometimes a few fights ago. And the escort missions with Whistler are even worse. With Grant, she just follows you. With Whistler, he has his own objective, so he's walking through the level himself. You can't pace him. So he'll just walk straight into a group of enemies, while you're still fighting a group prior to that. It's frustrating because the game is already struggling to stay responsive. And these moments pile on more pressure without giving you any tools to handle them. The combat in Blade 2 is a mess of interesting ideas that just don't come together. The analog stick system is innovative on paper, but it strips away any precision and turns every encounter just into a guessing game. The Rage mode gives you a glimpse of what the game could have been, but it's locked behind slow build-up and fades too quickly. And while the weapons and upgrades try to add variety, none of them fix the core problem. The combat just doesn't feel good to play. The level design in Blade 2 is one of those things that looks kinda decent at first, but starts wearing thin real fast. You've got places like Kharkov Towers, a clean, high-rise corporate building, then there's the Exploitica nightclub, which tries to bring some flashy vampire rave energy, and later you head into darker spots like the Gauntmoor Asylum. On paper, these sound like cool settings, but the actual layout of these levels is pretty much the same across the board. Linear hallways, locked doors, just copy and paste rooms. You walk into a space, fight a bunch of enemies, doors open, move on, over and over. There's not much in terms of exploration or variety. The game's structure is all about funneling you through tight corridors into mini combat arenas, and every one of them play out the same. You clear a wave, the doors unlock, and you're back on the hallway treadmill. Enemy variety sounds good on the surface. You have standard vampires, a Reaper-style infected, and later on these mutated monsters tied to the whole Project Vorpal thing. But here's the problem. They all kind of act the same. Most of them just rush you. There's no real tactics, no flanking, no team dynamics. One or two might hang back and throw projectiles or shoot you, but for the most part, they just charge and take turns swinging at you. The AI isn't aggressive enough to keep things tense, and it's not smart enough to force you to change your strategy. You don't get enemies working together or trying to trap you. It's just mobs recycled across every stage. Even when they introduce new enemy types, they're still built on the same basic behavior. You just have to hit them more times or avoid a slightly bigger wind-up. And because the combat system itself already feels kind of disconnected, the level and enemy design just make that worse. You're stuck fighting wave after wave in rooms that all feel the same. Against enemies that don't evolve, it turns into a loop. Fight, unlock, move forward, repeat. Just real quick, if you're enjoying this and you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for me. It helps the channel grow a lot, and honestly, growth's been picking up a lot lately, which I'm super thankful for. I've got a few different series running here. We have deep story recaps, horror game recommendations, games that I think deserve a comeback, and of course, this one, movie and license-based games, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If any of that sounds like your thing, stick around. I've got plenty more coming. Alright, now let's talk about how Blade 2 got made and why it shipped in the shape it did. So Blade 2 was announced back in early 2001 when Activision revealed that they were teaming up with Monkeyfoot Productions, a UK-based studio that had previously worked on Urban Chaos and Startopia. Originally, Monkeyfoot pitched a completely different game to Activision, a sci-fi project called Skyships. Activision passed on that, but they liked the team's work enough to offer them the Blade license instead. Funny enough, the core combat system for Blade 2, the whole right-stick 360 fighting thing, wasn't even built for Blade. It came from the original Skyships pitch and just got adapted for this project. According to the game's director, Mike Diskett, the team felt like Blade was already halfway to being a video game. The movie had over-the-top action, vampires that disintegrated, and not a ton of story to get in the way. In their eyes, it was a perfect match for an action-heavy arcade-style beat-em-up. The first time the game was shown publicly was in late 2001, and it popped up again at E3 2002. That's where the Rage system was revealed, and the 360 combat demoed live. Early previews were cautiously optimistic. IGN's writers liked the idea of being able to attack in any direction, but even back then, they pointed out issues with switching targets and the camera constantly getting stuck behind walls. By July, though, impressions started to cool off. Hillary Goldstein wrote that the combat looked chaotic, and not being able to choose whether Blade punches or kicks or elbows made the system feel disconnected. He called it counterintuitive, and even said it might straight up be frustrating for players used to traditional action games. The final game launched in North America on September 3rd, 2002. Same day as the Blade 2 DVD. That release date wasn't random. It was part of the marketing push. And that's a big reason why the game shipped the way it did. Monkeyfoot was working on a tight deadline from the start. They didn't get the time to iterate or polish the combat system. It had to be out, working or not. And unfortunately, Blade 2 didn't just flop critically, it flopped commercially too. Less than 500,000 units sold. It ended up being the last game Monkeyfoot ever made. That studio shut down in 2003, just a year after release. What we're left with is a game full of interesting ideas, rushed into something barely held together by deadlines. Blade 2 picks up 6 months after the movie. Nomak and the Reapers are gone, but the vampire threat isn't. The game opens with Blade and Whistler getting tipped off about a blood deal going down between a mafia crew and a vampire clan in the parking garage of Kharkov Towers. It's the big office block that's supposedly being used as a safe house for vampires. Blade shows up just in time to see the exchange. Some suited vampires takes off into the building with a briefcase. According to Whistler, the case is holding a vial of vampire DNA. Blade fights his way through the parking garage, cuts through a vampire nightclub called Exploitica, and ends up deep inside a company called Nth Phase. They're processing the DNA using some kind of machine. Turns out, the blood isn't just any sample. It belonged to Damascanos, the former head of the Vampire Nation from the second film. Blade shuts down the sequencer and dumps poison into the ventilation system, wiping out every vampire in the building. But that's just the first act. Back at base, Blade and Whistler find out that their ally, Dr. Grant, has been kidnapped by a group called the Byron Clan. Her GPS leads them into the subway, then deep into the sewers, where Whistler shows up again and sets charges to clear the path. This is those escort missions I was talking about. This one's horrible. Grant's being held at Gauntmoor Asylum, which is one of the more visually pleasing levels in my opinion. This is where the vampires are running human torture experiments to harness something called dark energy. It's all part of a project known as Vorpal. Blade rescues her, and she explains the vampires are trying to use this energy to engineer a new kind of super vampire, even stronger than the Reapers. Blade destroys the incubation chamber, but right after that, Grant drops a twist. The Byrons weren't even the ones behind it. It's the Arkan clan pulling the strings. So Blade heads to the Arkan Mountain facility, tears through their base, and starts dismantling their whole operation, destroying energy storage, clearing rooms, and linking back up with Grant. They reach the receiver that powers the whole system, but before she can disable it, Grant gets caught in an explosion. In her last breath, she tells Blade to finish the job. Blade meets back up with Whistler, they plant bombs, and they barely make it out before blowing the entire core up, putting an end to Project Vorpal and wiping out the Arkan clan with it. And that pretty much sums up the whole story. When Blade hit the shelves, the reviews were rough. Most critics agreed it had ambition but not much else. It ended up scoring the low 40s on Metacritic, and even the more generous reviews had major caveats. GameSpy, like I said earlier, called it an awkward waltz of confusion. Eurogamer said the 360 combat was a cool idea buried under poor execution. IGN pointed out the game captured the look of Blade, but not the feel. The camera was called out constantly. It'd get stuck on walls, flip around during fights, and completely lose track of what's going on. The combat system, the one feature they built the whole game around, just didn't hold up. Critics hated that you couldn't control what kind of move Blade did, only the direction. No combos or fluidity. Most people described it as clunky, repetitive, and just pure frustrating. And players didn't like it either. The game sold less than 500,000 copies, which is pretty bad considering it was tied to a hit movie and pushed hard by Activision. It just didn't land at all. Not with the critics, not with the fans, and not even as a curiosity. And it's not hard to see why. And at the end of the day, it's a licensed game that aimed high but tripped over its own systems. It wanted to innovate, but it forgot to be fun first. So yeah, Blade 2 for PS2 and Xbox, it wanted to be bold, different, and action-packed. It had a brand new combat system, a gritty story set after the film, and a ton of potential. But in the end, it just didn't land at all. The 360 combat system sounds innovative, but it plays like a prototype. The camera constantly fights you, the enemies all blur together, and the gameplay loop turns still super fast. And even if you're a huge Blade fan, like I was growing up, and I still am, there's not enough here to really dig into. It's not the worst licensed game ever, but it's the definition of a missed opportunity. A studio with good ideas, given a short deadline, pushed to make something quick for a movie release. It shows in every frame. And that's what my series here is all about. Movie licensed games. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Some of these games are legit hidden gems, like my King Kong video I did. Some are so bad they're fascinating, and some, like Blade 2, are just plain forgettable. It's not broken enough to be one of those games that's so bad they're good. It's not polished enough to recommend, and the game had cool ideas but no time to make them work. Blade deserves better, and hopefully with the MCU reboot coming, we'll get another swing at a proper Blade game someday. Until then, this one's a relic. A clunky, kind of fascinating vampire-filled relic. And if you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Seriously. It means a lot. This channel's been growing more and more lately, and I'm really excited about where it's going. All of your all's views and comments, every new subscriber, it helps keep this going, and I absolutely appreciate the hell out of it. And if you're new here, I've also got 3 other series that I rotate between. Deep dives for classic horror games I feel horror fans should play, full story breakdowns for lore-heavy games, and breakdowns for games that I feel deserve a second chance with a remake or a reboot or whatever. So if you're into horror, old school games, or weird 2000 stuff that fell through the cracks, there's probably something here that you'll be into. But if you're enjoying this series, movie and licensed games, the good, the bad, and the ugly, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I've got more weird and forgotten licensed games coming soon. And trust me, we've not even hit a little bit of it yet. And hey, if you played Blade 2, or you've got a guilty pleasure licensed game of your own, let me know in the comments. I read every one of them, and I might even cover it. And I've also set up a Facebook page for the channel I'm trying to grow. If you want to keep up with uploads, polls, behind the scenes stuff, or just help me build out the community, there's a link down in the description. It would mean a lot if you gave it a follow. I'm having a little trouble getting traction on that side of it. But if you've enjoyed the video, drop me a sub. Like I said, it helps a lot. And I will see you on the next one. Bye.